Dr. Celine Latulip, and this video is for the NSERC Create User-Centered Design module. And this is part 2 of the rapid prototyping methods. So in part 1, I talked about what rapid prototyping is and why it's useful, and then I went into a couple of different methods, what we would call low fidelity prototyping methods, storyboarding and blank model prototyping and wireframing. And in this video, we're going to proceed towards higher fidelity types of prototyping, but we're going to start with paper prototyping. So paper prototyping is where you create a paper mock-up of a user interface or a system, and you have different pieces of paper to represent different screens or pages in your system. You might use post-it notes folded up accordion style to represent menus that could drop down. You might have cardstock or like recipe cards that you would use to show dialog boxes. And you can have big pieces of paper that shift underneath frames to show sort of what would happen if the user scrolled through an interface. You can also use clear sheets of like what you would use for old overhead projectors and erasable markers and give that to the user to use as sort of like a mouse where they can click on things and check things off and stuff like that. And that can help fake the interaction. So this is an example of a paper prototype. You can see you've got one big sheet of paper and you've got various different parts of the interface that are represented with different types of post-it notes. And there are things like checkboxes and little alerts and so on that are all represented here. So this is really clearly representing sort of the layout of the interface and the types of information that are there. Now, we often use paper prototypes along with something that we call Wizard of Oz testing. And so this is where the person who created the prototype acts as a wizard and presents the prototype to a user, somebody who's their participant, and tells the user that they can click on things in the prototype by basically touching it with their finger. So they imagine that their finger is a mouse pointer. And so when the user touches something in the paper prototype with their finger, it's like clicking on that button. And then the wizard will update the system by basically taking a news piece of paper that's got that screen on it and suddenly putting that in front of the user to show what they would see next. And this allows you to sort of test a bunch of interaction ideas without having to implement them first. So paper prototypes allow you to do fairly sort of in the middle types of fidelity, medium fidelity information design, because you really are showing sort of layout and where things belong, and interaction design because you're showing through Wizard of Oz prototyping or testing in particular how the interface responds when the user does certain types of things. And there is some ability to do a little bit of visual design and branding. You might be able to show a little bit of that, but not very much. And you might show a little bit of editorial content. And in fact, that example that I just showed you probably had low fidelity editorial content, not very low fidelity. So it can vary a little bit. All right. Video prototyping is another thing that you might do instead of, say, Wizard of Oz testing with a paper prototype. And so this is where you are using a video to sort of, and you use cuts of the video and you trim the video so that you cut out the parts where the wizard changes the interface. And so this is a narrative form of prototyping. You're showing how a user completes a task by creating a video of somebody using something like a paper prototype or a digital prototype. But the thing isn't actually implemented. It's all kind of faked with video. And by showing that to people, you can get feedback on a system, again, without actually having to build or implement it. And if you search for video prototyping on YouTube, you'll see lots of examples of what video prototypes might look like. So this is just one example that I pulled off of YouTube of a video of somebody showing how a mobile interface that's been mocked up with a paper prototype might work, and the video goes through the entire series of interactions showing exactly what happens as the user interacts with each screen. So video prototypes, typically the interaction design is going to be higher fidelity because you're showing how things work. The information design may be medium fidelity. It could be a little bit higher. And again, visual design and branding usually isn't the focus here at this stage, and editorial content isn't much of a focus. We're not actually showing real pictures or having real data in there at all. So Interactive prototyping is where you take it up to the next level. And this is what you do when you're a little later in the design process and you've sort of narrowed down and you really know what you're designing, and you've got to sort of now focus on the details. And there are many, many specialized tools that have been developed to help people create interactive prototypes. So Balsamiq Mockups, Axure, Adobe Experience Design, Sketch, InVision, there's just tons of these tools out there. Balsamiq Mockups is definitely my favorite. And it's important to note that you don't actually have to use a specialized tool. You can also use sort of general purpose digital design tools. So people build prototypes, interactive prototypes with Adobe Illustrator or using something like PowerPoint, which I've done a lot of. So this is a screenshot from Balsamiq, and you can see up at the top that there's all these different sort of common interface components, like, a clock picker and toggle buttons and, the keyboard and an iPhone layout and so on. And then you can drag these down into the canvas and build up your different interface. You can see that there's there's containers, there's forms, there's various different layouts, and then there's markup, so for adding comments for your colleagues to look at. And with Balsamiq Mockups, once you've got an interface designed, you can actually link things. So you can click on this and say, when a user clicks this, I want to link to a different screen that I've designed here. And you can see all the different screens that are listed down here as tabs. And once you've linked all of these screens up, you can go into presentation mode, hand your computer off to a user, and they get this big mouse cursor that they can use, and they can click through, and it will actually automatically take them through to all the different screens depending on what they click, so they can really experience the flow of interaction. So, and many of the interactive prototyping tools do this kind of thing. Balsamiq Mockups just happens to be my favorite. You can get a 30-day free trial, and it's a relatively inexpensive tool if you decide to buy it. I've also done a lot of prototyping using PowerPoint, because PowerPoint slides can be designed to look like almost anything. And with sort of the mouse actions that you can do, where you can make PowerPoint slides interactive. And this is so that you can design sort of kiosk presentations with PowerPoint that people can go through to find out information. And you'll see this all the time in like tourist spots and so on. But you can use that to actually hook up and link from one slide to another based on what a user clicks. And that can sort of imitate the interaction of, interacting with an interface. And so that's another tool that's useful. And the nice thing about PowerPoint is many people already have it and they already know how to use it. And you only need to add in knowledge of a few extra little features that you might not have used before to get PowerPoint to create interactive prototypes. And I have made a video about how to do interactive prototyping with PowerPoint, and it's on my YouTube channel. So feel free to go and look that up if you're interested. So interactive prototypes, we're getting a little bit more high fidelity in general. So the information design is going to be higher fidelity. The interaction design is going to be higher fidelity because people can really actually kind of feel like they're experiencing what it feels like to go through the application. These are typically going to be digital, and the visual design and branding is going to be a little bit more evident. You'll see a little bit more of that. And there might actually be some real editorial content, such as photos and some text blocks and so on, that are actually going to end up in the final product. So the last type of prototyping that we can talk about is coded prototyping. And this is the use of programming or scripting languages like JavaScript or Python to create interactive prototypes. And I say here, this is what the whole second half of the class will be about. So that's from a class that I taught, and that shouldn't be in the slide. But when you're doing coded prototyping, you are prototyping the interface, you're coding it up, it's actually working. It might be on a web page, or it might be a standalone app that people can download and run. And what makes it a prototype rather than a real full-scale final application is that it's typically not hooked up to any real data source. So many applications are going to be, hooked into a database or, pulling in Twitter data or that type of thing. And a coded prototype probably isn't. It's probably just going to have some hard-coded data in there for people to play with. So you don't have to go the full-scale route of actually making it fully work, but you're making sort of the front end of it, or the interface work. And if you have coding skills, this is definitely something you can do. So this shows an example of somebody prototyping a McDonald's interactive kiosk menu, and that was coded by a student of mine using Flash way back in the day when Flash was a thing you actually coded with. So that's it for the coded prototypes. And in terms of the fidelity here, these take a lot more time to develop, but they also allow you to experience what looks much closer to the final product. So the information design is very high. The interaction design is pretty high fidelity. The visual design and branding is likely to be high fidelity. And there's actually going to be some real content in it, even though it may not be hooked up to a real live data source. All right, so to recap, prototypes are tools that we use both to explore our ideas for ourselves, but also to get feedback on those ideas from our target audience users. And so when you're thinking about how to prototype, you want to think about what you want to focus on and choose the type of prototyping tool that's appropriate for that. So, for example, if you're really thinking about, you've got an idea, a high-level concept idea, and you want to present that to people to get feedback on it, if you do a very high-fidelity interactive digital prototype using something like Balsamiq or in PowerPoint, and you make it look like a final finished end product, people are going to be commenting on the nuances and the details and your color scheme and things like that, instead of focusing on the concept. So if you want people to focus on the concept or idea, you really want to present a storyboard or maybe a video prototype or something like that. So think about what you're trying to accomplish and choose the right level of fidelity of prototyping tool. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.